Johnny Carson.
Hello, this is Dorothy Letterman.
That's right, Dorothy.
Yes, it is. Who's this?
Are you the mother of David Letterman who does Late Night on NBC?
This. You walked out on us once before. Didn't walk out on us.
I understood that you were paying me a large amount of money for this.
The more you think about it, there are so many things to miss about Johnny Carson. And when this all happened, I had the straight...
He was the king of late night, the man who made America laugh for 30 years straight. But behind the curtain, Johnny Carson was not just the charming host everyone adored. He was feared, resented, and sometimes even hated. Careers were made on his stage, but with one decision, he could also destroy them forever. Guests banned for life, feuds that turned ugly, and a love life filled with betrayals and scandal. Carson's story was not just about fame, it was about power, grudges, and the price of being America's favorite entertainer. And what you're about to hear may change the way you see the legend of Johnny Carson forever. Long before Johnny Carson became the most powerful figure in late-night television, he was just a small-town boy with a restless curiosity and a knack for entertaining. Born on October 23, 1925, in Corning, Iowa, Carson grew up in the kind of modest Midwestern towns where ambition was usually measured in steady jobs and quiet lives. But even as a child, Carson was not content with ordinary. At 12 years old, he stumbled across a book on magic tricks at the local library, and that single discovery lit a fire that would never go out. Soon he was astonishing his family with card tricks, rope illusions, and sleight of hand. His mother even sewed him a cape, and by the age of 14 he was performing publicly as the Great Carsani, making a modest $3 per show, more than enough to prove he had a gift that went beyond his years. But Carson's early ambitions were not limited to magic shows in small Nebraska auditoriums. He had a mischievous streak and a taste for adventure that would follow him throughout his life. In one legendary incident after high school, he was fined $50 for impersonating a Navy midshipman, a stunt that made local headlines and hinted at the daring personality that would later captivate millions. By 1943, as World War II raged on, Carson traded in his magician's cape for a Navy uniform. He entered the V-12 Navy College training program and was soon commissioned as an ensign, serving aboard the battleship USS Pennsylvania. His job was serious, decoding encrypted messages, but even in the structured world of the military, Carson found ways to entertain. He developed a reputation as a talented amateur boxer, boasting an undefeated 10-0 record, and once stunned the Secretary of the Navy by performing a quick-witted card trick that left a lasting impression. When asked if he planned to make the Navy his career, Carson did not hesitate. "No," he said, "I want to be a magician." It was a bold statement, but one that spoke volumes. Even in uniform, his heart belonged on a stage. After the war ended, Carson seized the opportunity offered by the GI Bill and enrolled at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. At first, he dreamed of becoming a comedy writer and majored in journalism, but it did not take long before he realized his real calling was not just on paper, it was behind a microphone. He shifted his focus to speech and drama, diving into the world of radio at a time when broadcasting was exploding in popularity. His senior thesis, titled How to Write Comedy for Radio, was a unique blend of academic analysis and practical performance. It included taped skits, explanations of comedic timing, and dissections of what made audiences laugh. The project not only showcased his analytical mind, but also his natural instincts for humor, allowing him to graduate in just 3 years with a degree in radio and speech and a minor in physics, just in case his showbiz dreams did not pan out. Carson's first real taste of broadcasting came in 1950, when he landed a job at WOW AM and WOW TV in Omaha, Nebraska. His local morning television program, The Squirrel's Nest, was low-budget, scrappy, and full of satire that often pushed the limits of small-town sensibilities. In one segment, Carson famously interviewed pigeons on the courthouse roof, using their cooing noises as punchlines to mock local politicians. The bit was hilarious and risky, and it caught attention, sometimes from the very people he was skewering. Yet, instead of punishing him, one of those politicians' wives actually introduced him to bigger opportunities. That stroke of luck eventually propelled him west to Los Angeles in 1951, where he landed a job at CBS's local station, KNXT. There he created Carson's Cellar, a quirky, low-budget sketch comedy show that aired from 1951 to 1953. Though it never pulled massive ratings, It was clever, original, and sharp enough to catch the eyes of Hollywood insiders. Among Carson's earliest fans was legendary comedian Red Skelton, who hired him as a writer in 1953. It did not take long before fate intervened. One evening, just before a live broadcast, Skelton knocked himself unconscious in a backstage accident. Carson, with almost no preparation, was asked to step in as host. With the pressure on and millions watching, he delivered a performance so sharp and confident that it became a turning point in his career. Another comedy legend, Jack Benny, soon noticed his talent as well. When Carson appeared on Benny's program in 1955, he jokingly accused the veteran comedian of copying his mannerisms, a daring move that could have backfired, but instead earned him Benny's admiration and prediction of a long, successful career. Through the 1950s, Carson kept grinding. He hosted small variety programs like The Johnny Carson Show and even game shows like Earn Your Vacation. While some flopped, they gave him valuable experience and proved his resilience. Each setback only sharpened his skills, each opportunity putting him closer to the spotlight that would one day be his. By the early 1960s, television was entering a new era, and NBC's Tonight Show, still searching for its permanent identity, was waiting for the right person to take it to the next level. That person, as America would soon discover, was Johnny Carson. By the early 1960s, late-night television was still in its infancy. NBC's Tonight Show had started in 1954 with Steve Allen, who built the foundation with witty monologues and playful interviews. When Jack Paar took over in 1957, he brought a more unpredictable, emotional touch. He cried on air, stormed off during disputes, and turned the program into a national conversation piece. But by 1962, Paar had stepped away, and NBC found itself searching for a new face to carry the torch. What they did not realize was that the man they chose would not just carry it, he would completely redefine what late-night television meant for the next 30 years. At the time, Johnny Carson was hosting a quirky daytime game show called Who Do You Trust on ABC. The show was not glamorous, but Carson's quick wit and ability to connect with contestants made him stand out in an industry crowded with personalities. When NBC approached him about replacing Paar, Carson hesitated. Hosting a nightly 105-minute show seemed like an impossible task, and he was all too aware that several comedy giants, Groucho Marx, Jackie Gleason, and Joey Bishop, had already turned down the job. Carson feared being stuck in a grueling routine that might burn him out or expose his weaknesses. But NBC was relentless. After months of convincing, he finally agreed, though he still had 6 months left on his ABC contract. That meant The Tonight Show would run with rotating guest hosts, Merv Griffin, Jerry Lewis, Groucho Marx, and others, until Carson's debut on October 1, 1962. His first months were not smooth. Carson was nervous, doubted himself, and struggled to find his rhythm. The audience was not sure what to make of him, and NBC executives worried they had made the wrong choice. But slowly, night after night, Carson began shaping the show into his own creation. He introduced a sense of structure that had been missing. He tightened the opening monologue, sharpened the guest interviews, and crafted recurring sketches that gave the show a personality unique to him. With the help of his loyal announcer and sidekick Ed McMahon, whom he brought over from Who Do You Trust, and bandleader Skitch Henderson, Carson built a late-night machine that balanced consistency with spontaneity. One of Carson's greatest strengths was his ability to handle failure with charm. When a joke bombed in his monologue, he did not panic. He turned it into a moment. Sometimes he would mock his own material with a sarcastic quip, or he'd break into a goofy soft shoe dance to Tea for Two, cued instantly by the band. Other times he would deadpan into the microphone with lines like, "Attention Kmart shoppers, clean up on aisle 4. What could have been awkward silences became some of his funniest moments, and audiences loved him for it. That self-deprecating style made him relatable. He was not just a polished host delivering scripted lines. He was a performer who could roll with anything. Carson also knew the importance of trademarks. His playful golf swing at the end of the monologue became an instantly recognizable ritual. His recurring characters, like Karnak the Magnificent, the all-knowing turban-wearing psychic, added variety and gave fans something to look forward to. And his theme music, Johnny's Theme by Paul Anka, created a sense of tradition that lasted from his very first show in 1962 to his farewell in 1992. It was not just a program, it was an institution, and viewers tuned in night after night, not just for celebrity gossip but for the comfort of Carson's familiar presence. By the early 1970s, Carson had perfected the formula. In 1972, he moved the show from New York's Rockefeller Center to Burbank, California, putting the stage within reach of Hollywood's biggest stars. Suddenly, the guest list exploded. Actors, musicians, and comedians all wanted a seat across from Carson because they knew one good appearance could change their careers overnight. To be called over to the couch after a stand-up set was the ultimate seal of approval, and Carson's nod could launch someone from obscurity to stardom in an instant. But Carson's power came with pressure. By the late 1970s, The Tonight Show was not just a talk show, it was NBC's most valuable asset, pulling in staggering ratings and generating over 17% of the network's profits. Carson, who had once doubted whether he could handle the job, had become the single most important figure at NBC. His influence was so great that he was able to cut back his hosting schedule in 1980, reducing the show's runtime from 90 minutes to 60, and hosting only 3 nights a week. Even with less airtime, his dominance never wavered. Legendary director Billy Wilder once summed up Carson's nightly challenge. No matter what kind of deadweight guests he gets, he has to make them funny and exciting. He has to be their nurse and their surgeon every night, and he does it without a net. It was true. Carson was not just entertaining. He was saving shows, carrying weak guests, and keeping millions of Americans awake with laughter. But as his star rose higher, so did the risks of crossing him. Because while Carson perfected the art of making the nation laugh, not everyone backstage was laughing. Some guests who pushed too far, mocked him too harshly, or betrayed his trust would soon discover that when Johnny Carson closed a door, it rarely opened again. For 3 decades, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was not just late-night entertainment, it was the ultimate gatekeeper of fame. Getting an invitation meant validation, a career boost, and sometimes even overnight success. But if you crossed Johnny Carson, the consequences could be devastating. A single misstep could earn you a silent exile, a permanent ban that shut you out not only from Carson's stage, but from a piece of Hollywood itself. Over the years, Carson built an infamous list of guests who were never welcomed back, and their stories reveal just how much power he wielded behind that desk. The most famous of these bans was Joan Rivers. For years, she was not just a guest, she was practically family to Carson. Their banter was quick, their chemistry undeniable, and when Carson needed a break, Rivers often filled in as guest host. In fact, she credited Carson with launching her career, but in 1986, she shocked everyone by accepting her own late-night talk show at Fox. The real blow was not that she took the job, it was that she never told Carson in advance. When he found out, he was furious. Not only did he ban her from The Tonight Show for life, but he cut her off personally, refusing to ever speak to her again. Rumors in Hollywood whispered that the betrayal may have hit him harder than it should have, because the two had once shared more than just a professional bond. Some speculated they'd had an affair, though Rivers never confirmed it. Whether it was business or something deeper, Carson's grudge lasted until his death in 2005. The ban was not lifted until 2014, nearly 30 years later, when Jimmy Fallon invited Rivers back. Another casualty was impressionist Rich Little. He built a career on mimicking celebrities, and Carson himself had once been a favorite target. At first, Johnny laughed along, but after years of watching his own quirks parodied on stage, the joke wore thin. By 1982, Rich Little's appearances abruptly stopped. Some claimed Carson had grown tired of being mocked. Others insisted Little's act had simply gone stale. Whatever the truth, the invitations dried up. Years later, Little would get the last laugh when he portrayed Carson in HBO's The Late Shift, a film that dramatized the bitter battle over Carson's succession. By then, though, Carson's reputation as a man who never forgave was already cemented. If Carson disliked subtle digs, he had no tolerance for outright chaos. On May 9, 1994, eccentric comedian Bobcat Goldthwait appeared on The Tonight Show and decided to turn his segment into pure mayhem. In the middle of the broadcast, he lit his chair on fire. The audience gasped, the producers panicked, and Jay Leno, who had inherited the show 2 years earlier, looked like he was regretting every career decision he had ever made. The fire was real, not a gag, and the aftermath was swift. Goldthwait was arrested, fined $2,700, and forced to make public service announcements about fire safety. Needless to say, his Tonight Show career went up in smoke. Shock jock Howard Stern found out the hard way that even ratings could not protect him. When he first appeared on The Tonight Show under Leno, Stern was actually supportive, encouraging his fans to watch. But by 1995, he arrived determined to push boundaries. He showed up with two bikini-clad women who engaged in explicit antics right there on the set. The scene was so wild that Leno walked off stage mid-show, leaving Stern to create chaos on his own. Producers quickly cut the most explicit moments from the broadcast, but the damage was done. Stern was never invited back, and true to form, he spent years trashing Leno on his radio show. Then there was Kathy Griffin, a comedian who practically collected bands like trophies. Known for her unfiltered stand-up and outrageous stories, Griffin often went too far for network television. Leno, who valued control and predictability, had no patience for her unpredictable style. After a few appearances filled with profanity-laced tangents, Griffin was permanently benched from The Tonight Show. She would later joke that she was banned from nearly every late-night show at some point in her career, but Carson's old stage remained one of the most infamous doors closed to her. If Johnny Carson's guest bans revealed his power on The Tonight Show, his personal feuds showed just how deeply he could hold a grudge. Carson was not the type to scream or throw punches in public. He had a cooler, sharper way of cutting someone off. When Johnny felt betrayed or humiliated, the result was often a cold, permanent silence, and some of his feuds became so infamous that they're still talked about today, decades after his final show. The most notorious was his clash with Wayne Newton. For years, Newton was one of Carson's favorite guests, appearing more than 30 times. Carson loved poking fun at celebrities, and most took it as a badge of honor. But Newton was different. In 1980, Newton outbid Carson for control of the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas, a deal that bruised Johnny's ego. From that point on, Carson's jokes about Newton seemed to have an edge. Snide comments about Newton's masculinity and whispers about his finances. To Johnny, they were just punchlines. To Newton, they were attacks. Finally, Newton had enough. He stormed into Carson's office at NBC and delivered a warning face-to-face. "You ever say my name again, and I will kick your ass." For a man known for velvet tuxedos and ballads, it was a shocking confrontation. Carson reportedly backed off, but their friendship was shattered forever. Newton never returned to The Tonight Show, and the feud became a Hollywood legend. Even beloved comedians were not safe. Dana Carvey, riding high from Saturday Night Live and the success of Wayne's World, thought his Carson impression would be a crowd pleaser. He had mocked Carson before in SNL sketches, portraying him as out of touch, and audiences loved it. But when he dared to perform the impression in front of Johnny himself on The Tonight Show, the host was not amused. Carson hated it, and Carvey found himself quietly blacklisted, never invited back even when Wayne's World became one of the biggest comedies of the era. Over the years, dozens of names quietly joined the unspoken blacklist. Some were banned for defiance, others for bad taste, and a few for simply making Johnny uncomfortable. The Tonight Show may have been America's nightly escape, but behind the laughter was a host with a long memory and little patience for betrayal. One wrong move could turn an open door into a permanent lock, and once Carson closed it, he rarely looked back. If Johnny Carson ruled late-night television with charm and wit, his private life told a much darker story. While America saw the smooth-talking entertainer who could make anyone laugh, behind closed doors, Carson struggled with relationships that often ended in heartbreak, betrayal, and bitter silence. 4 marriages, 3 divorces, strained relationships with his children, and endless rumors of affairs left him with a reputation as a man who could make the world laugh, but not the people closest to him. Carson's first marriage to Jody Walcott seemed almost ordinary at first. They met in college, and by the time Carson's career began to take off, they had 3 children together, Richard, Christopher, and Corey. But the more his fame grew, the more cracks appeared at home. Friends and family described the marriage as a battlefield of booze-fueled arguments, icy silences, and resentment. Carson was consumed by his work and fame, while Jody was left to deal with the fallout. Their oldest son, Rick, struggled with mental illness at a time when it was rarely discussed publicly. Instead of helping, Carson reportedly distanced himself, avoiding visits during Rick's hospital stays and lashing out during family gatherings. At Carson's 25th anniversary party, Rick arrived drunk, and witnesses claimed Johnny lost his temper, yelling at him in front of guests and nearly striking him before being pulled away. Their relationship never recovered, and in 1991, Rick tragically died in a car accident. Carson dedicated a monologue to his son on the show, but those who knew him said the bond had been broken long before. By the time his marriage to Jody ended in 1963, Carson was already on the path to becoming the king of late night, but at the cost of a stable family life. His second marriage to Joanne Copeland began just as his television career exploded. Joanne had been a flight attendant when they met, and at first their marriage seemed glamorous, filled with high society parties and celebrity friends. But by the early 1970s, rumors swirled that Joanne was having an affair with football star Frank Gifford. Carson's lawyer and close confidant, Henry Bushkin, later revealed shocking details in his memoir. Johnny became obsessed with catching his wife in the act, even arming himself with a revolver while demanding Bushkin help him gather evidence. When the proof finally came, Carson broke down, sobbing openly in front of Bushkin, devastated at being betrayed. But the truth was more complicated. Carson himself was far from faithful. Extravagant gifts like diamonds and luxury cars were often used to cover up his own affairs, including a rumored entanglement with Joan Rivers. When the divorce was finalized in 1972, Joanne walked away still connected to Carson's world, but their marriage was another casualty of his turbulent personal life. Carson did not waste time before marrying again. Just months after his divorce, he wed Joanna Holland, a model and socialite. Their relationship started with glamour, lavish dinners, red carpet appearances, and a life surrounded by Hollywood elites. But Holland quickly discovered what Carson's previous wives already knew. His temper and drinking made him unpredictable. In interviews years later, she described his drinking as a trigger for explosive fights, moments where he could turn from charming to cruel in an instant. Carson himself admitted during a 1979 interview that alcohol made him cold and hostile rather than playful, a confession that confirmed what those closest to him already knew. For over a decade, Joanna endured the cycle of wealth, parties, and public smiles masking private battles. By 1985, she had enough, filing for divorce in what became another messy split. His fourth and final marriage was to Alexis Moss in 1987, and unlike the others, it seemed to bring Carson a measure of peace. Moss was younger, quieter, and not part of Hollywood's high-profile scene. Their wedding was private, attended only by a handful of people, with no fanfare or press, just Johnny, Alexis, and a quiet ceremony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. For the first time, Carson appeared content, traveling with Moss and enjoying a life away from the spotlight. Friends later said Alexis was the only woman who truly brought him stability, and she remained by his side until his death in 2005. For all the charm America saw on their television screens, Johnny Carson carried a darkness that haunted nearly every part of his personal life. To the public, he was smooth, quick-witted, and endlessly funny. But those who knew him privately described a man plagued by insecurities, fueled by alcohol, and burdened by grudges that never lifted. Carson could make millions laugh with ease, but behind the curtain he was a man at war with himself. One of Carson's most visible struggles was his drinking. In interviews, he admitted that alcohol did not make him fun-loving or social. It turned him cold, angry, and detached. Colleagues recalled how he could walk into a room warm and engaging, then shift into an icy silence after just a few drinks. Even Ed McMahon, Carson's longtime sidekick and closest friend, hinted at the volatility, remembering how unpredictable Johnny could become when the drinking took over. It was a side of him that viewers never saw, carefully hidden behind the curtain of The Tonight Show. Carson's temper extended beyond his marriages. Guests and colleagues learned quickly that his patience had limits. If someone embarrassed him or crossed an unspoken boundary, he rarely forgave. Writers and staff members described an atmosphere where people walked on eggshells, careful not to trigger Johnny's sharp tongue. To be in his inner circle meant loyalty was demanded, and mistakes were not easily forgotten. Isolation only deepened his darker tendencies. Despite being adored by millions, Carson lived much of his life in solitude. He hated public appearances, avoided Hollywood parties, and often disappeared for long stretches, retreating into his Malibu home or taking solo trips on his yacht. Those who knew him well said he was painfully shy off camera, uncomfortable in large groups unless he was performing. It was as if the energy he poured into entertaining the world left him drained and unwilling to connect with people in his private hours. By the time Johnny Carson retired in 1992, he was not just leaving a television show, he was closing the book on an entire era of American entertainment. For 30 years, The Tonight Show had been more than a program. It was a nightly ritual that shaped comedy, launched careers, and set the standard for everything that came after. His impact stretched far beyond laughs. It changed how Americans ended their day, and it redefined what television could mean in people's lives. Carson's greatest gift was timing. Every night, his monologues served as a mirror of American culture, blending sharp political commentary with silly one-liners that kept viewers hooked. His jokes about presidents, celebrities, and scandals did not just reflect the headlines, they often became part of the national conversation themselves. If Johnny joked about it, it mattered, and when a joke bombed, his ability to recover with a smirk, a golf swing, or a self-deprecating jab turned failure into comedy gold. That resilience became his signature, inspiring generations of comedians who learned that charm could save almost any misstep. But Carson's influence was not just about his own performance. It was about the doors he opened for others. His couch was the most coveted seat in Hollywood. Stand-up comedians dreamed of the moment Johnny would motion them over after a set, because that simple gesture could transform their careers overnight. Legends like David Letterman, Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld, and Ellen DeGeneres all credited their breakthroughs to Carson's approval. He was not just a host, he was a kingmaker, the man who could turn unknowns into stars with a single wave of his hand. Despite Hollywood constantly offering him new paths, Carson famously resisted. He turned down roles in major films, including The Thomas Crown Affair and Blazing Saddles, and even declined Martin Scorsese's offer to star alongside Robert De Niro in The King of Comedy. For Carson, television was not just a stepping stone, it was his kingdom. While others chased Hollywood glory, Johnny stayed loyal to the late-night stage, perfecting his craft until it was untouchable. That decision solidified his reputation as someone who did not just dabble in entertainment, he owned his corner of it. By the late 1970s, Carson had become the highest-paid personality in television, pulling in millions per year at a time when that kind of money was unheard of. NBC relied on him not just for ratings but for survival. In 1980, during tense negotiations, Carson threatened to leave. NBC panicked, offering him a 3-year deal that gave him unprecedented control. He shortened the show from 90 minutes to 60, reduced his weekly appearances, and still managed to dominate the ratings. The fact that even working part-time, he remained the most powerful man in television says everything about the grip he had on audiences. His cultural influence was recognized in 1987 when he was awarded the Peabody Award for his 25 years on The Tonight Show. The board described him as an American institution, a household word, and the most widely quoted American. That recognition summed up exactly what he had become. More than a comedian, more than a host, he was part of the fabric of American life. Millions of people who never met him felt like they knew him, because for 30 years he was in their living rooms, saying goodnight in his own effortless way. Carson's farewell in 1992 was a television moment unlike any other. After weeks of tributes and clips revisiting his legendary career, his final broadcast on May 22nd drew more than 50 million viewers, a staggering number that rivaled Super Bowl ratings. His goodbye was not filled with spectacle or self-congratulation. Instead, it was quiet, heartfelt, and deeply human. He thanked the audience for their loyalty, admitted he would miss them, and ended with a simple promise: "I bid you a very heartfelt good night." For millions watching, it was the end of an era. Even after retirement, Carson's influence lingered. Late-night hosts who followed, Leno, Letterman, Conan, Fallon, were all measured against him. His style, his timing, and his authority became the benchmark. Comedians still study his work, dissecting how he turned silences into laughs, and how he built an entire show around charm, wit, and the ability to improvise. To this day, his name remains synonymous with late-night television, a standard no one has fully surpassed. Carson's legacy is a paradox. He was a man filled with contradictions, warm and funny on screen, distant and troubled off it, yet those contradictions made him fascinating, both to his audience and to history. For 30 years he gave America laughter at the end of long days, even when he could not find peace in his own life. And that is the mark of a true legend, someone who carries the weight of their own struggles while still making the rest of the world forget theirs, if only for an hour. Johnny Carson was more than just a late-night host. He was a cultural force who shaped American entertainment for 3 decades. On screen, he was effortless, charming, and endlessly funny. But off-screen, he was complicated, haunted by broken marriages, strained family ties, and grudges that lasted a lifetime. His guest bands showed the power he held over Hollywood. His feuds revealed the sharp edge beneath the smile, and his love life exposed a man who could conquer television but not his own personal demons. Yet through it all, he remained the face America trusted to close out the day with laughter. Carson's story is one of contradictions. A private man who lived in the public eye, a figure adored by millions yet feared by those who knew him best. He gave everything to The Tonight Show, his energy, his creativity, and perhaps even the happiness he could never fully find at home. When he said goodbye in 1992, it was not just the end of a show, it was the end of an era, the closing chapter of television's golden age of late night. So how should we remember Johnny Carson? Was he the misunderstood genius who sacrificed himself for his audience, or a powerful figure who let pride, grudges, and personal demons overshadow his gifts? Perhaps the truth is both. What's certain is that no one before or since has left a mark on television quite like him. And now, the question goes to you. Do you see Carson as the greatest talk show host of all time, or as one of Hollywood's most complicated legends? Let us know what you think in the comments.